You know, as a side hustle, James Joyce also reviewed books. Better than food, man. I roasted this coffee. I'm proud of myself. This is the first batch that is drinkable, you know. Still learning about it, but if you want to know more about that, you can go to patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood. Hope everyone is doing well. It's great to see you, of course. The long overdue James Joyce was an Irishman, one of the most renowned authors of the 20th century, responsible for the enormous novel Ulysses. Published in 1922, it serves as the ultimate example for many of the modernist novel, utilizing different methods, new methods at the time for storytelling, like stream of consciousness and interior monologues. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is the precursor to Ulysses, being written and revised over a period of approximately 10 years, starting in 1904, incorporating the stylistic use of free indirect speech, where the narration is in the voice of the main character, or the two are at least partially combined. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is semi-autobiographical fiction, in which the main character, Stephen Daedalus, discovers that after an extremely pious period in his life, he would much rather become an artist, a writer. And ultimately he leaves his country, his religion, his friends, his family, everything, as James himself did, disillusioned with Ireland, its politics, and the church. When the soul of man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion, I shall try to fly by those nets. And another one, do you know what Ireland is? Asked Stephen with cold violence. Ireland is the old sow that eats her farrow. But how do you really feel, James? We begin in his childhood and with each chapter move forward in time to an older version of him, like in a film. Joyce was a big fan of the cinema, and subsequently Portrait employs this cinematic style, sometimes using the literary version of a tracking shot, which is discussed in a BBC podcast I've linked to in the description box below. Actually, believe it or not, James Joyce, with the help of some backers, was responsible for launching the first Irish cinema, Volta Cinematograph, in Dublin, though unfortunately it didn't do well commercially. The striking thing about Joyce's Portrait is the style in which it's told, because the tone and the point of view are changing with the maturity of the protagonist, right? So in the beginning, it's childlike and simplistic. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road, and this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nicen's little boy named Baby Tucku. His father told him that story. His father looked at him through a glass. He had a hairy face. And it's woven seamlessly, so it's not always apparent when the dramatic shift has taken place. Stephen Daedalus starts thinking about God at a very early age. And I'm sure most of us have had thoughts like this. After writing down who he is and where he is in the world, he begins questioning. I thought this was a really interesting passage. He just writes down Stephen Daedalus, in the class of elements at school, Clongowes Wood College, Sallins, the name of the town, in County Kildare, Ireland, in Europe, in the world, in the universe. What was after the universe? Nothing. But was there anything round the universe to show where it stopped before the nothing place began? It could not be a wall, but there could be a thin, thin line there all around everything. It was very big to think about everything and everywhere. Only God could do that. He tried to think what a big thought that must be. But he could only think of God. God was God's name, just as his name was Stephen. Dieu was the French for God, and that was God's name too. And when anyone prayed to God and said Dieu, then God knew at once that it was a French person that was praying. But though there were different names for God in all the different languages in the world, and God understood what all the people who prayed said in their different languages, still God remained always the same God, and God's real name was God. It made him very tired to think that way. For a while after his religious upbringing, he's unconcerned with the consequences of vice. He loses his virginity to a prostitute, as I believe Joyce did. He masturbates, he's a generally sinful teenager exploring all the different realms of debauchery. But then he goes on this religious retreat and hears the most terrifying sermon from a preacher ever penned. It's just designed to scare the shit out of these kids, right? It's just humorously graphic descriptions of the pains and torments of the damned in hell. Outrageously imaginative and specific. By itself makes the whole novel worth it. Now let us for a moment to realize, as far as we can, the nature of that abode of the damned which the justice of an offended God has called into existence for the eternal punishment of sinners. Hell is a strait and dark and foul-smelling prison, an abode of demons and lost souls, filled with fire and smoke. The straightness of this prison house is expressly designed by God to punish those who refused to be bound by his laws. In earthly prisons, the poor captive has at least some liberty of movement, were it only within the four walls of his cell or in the gloomy yard of his prison. Not so in hell. There, by reason of the great number of the damned, the prisoners are heaped together in their awful prison, the walls of which are said to be 4,000 miles thick. And the damned are so utterly bound and helpless that, as a blessed saint, Saint Anselm, writes in his book on similitudes, they are not even able to remove from the eye a worm that gnaws it. But wait, there's more. The sulphurous brimstone which burns in hell is a substance which is specially designed to burn forever and forever, with unspeakable fury. Moreover, our earthly fire destroys the same time as it burns, so that the more intense it is, the shorter is its duration. But the fire of hell has this property, that it preserves that which it burns. And though it rages with incredible intensity, it rages forever. So this scares the hell out of him, or into him, and he becomes a pious little prince, a perfect manifestation of the devoted soul. But he can't hold out for long, right? And he sees the sin coming towards him. He sees it. He describes it like an ocean tide. It just comes close, and he resists it, and it just backs away, but it just starts over again. Always keeps coming. It never leaves him. So his break with the church is inevitable. And as he develops his literary and artistic consciousness, he knows it. So he becomes philosophically inquisitive and religiously skeptical, finally reaching conclusions on his own about the nature of, everything, art and beauty. And to speak of these things and to try to understand their nature, and having understood it, to try slowly and humbly and constantly to express, to press out again from the gross earth, or what it brings forth, from sound and shape and color, which are the prison gates of our soul, an image of the beauty we have come to understand. That is art. He reaches these conclusions after having a lot of conversations with his peers and reading Aquinas and a lot of philosophers. Finally, the novel changes one more time stylistically into this bare-bones journal with like one paragraph or so for each day, each entry, as it leads up to his departure from Ireland. Stephen Daedalus is a recurring character in Joyce's fiction. He's also in Ulysses, and he's basically Joyce's alter ego. A lot of things that happened to him were inspired by events in Joyce's life, real things that happened to him. One quick tip, there's a lot of Latin phrases in this book, and also a lot of Irish slang and euphemisms, so it's helpful to have a guide, and I'll leave a link in the description box below, but I'm sure you can just type into Google and you can find one. There's plenty of great ones. Joyce's fiction is full of references to myth. In Greek mythology, Daedalus is the father of Icarus. Remember, the boy with the wings who flew too close to the sun, and his wings melted because they were made of wax, and he fell into the sea and he drowned. Well, Daedalus was his father, and he was the one who made the wings for Icarus. And he's mentioned in Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I have not read yet. This is what Stephen seeks to be, the artist, the great artificer, as Stephen refers to it in the book. Daedalus is not only the creator of the failed wings of Icarus. Daedalus warned him, too, not to fly too close to the sun, but he lost himself. But he was also the creator of the giant, complex labyrinth which housed the Minotaur, the son of King Minos. So difficult to navigate, it took a hero to do so. Theseus, that was Theseus who slayed the Minotaur. Theseus. It's fucking impossible to say. Daedalus serves as a warning, right? Be careful what you create. So is this what Stephen has in mind when he courageously makes the sacrifice of all else in his pursuit of beauty? Could be. I don't know. Joyce has this great ability to communicate revelations, artistic or religious, with contagious enthusiasm. Several times in the book, Stephen's mind is opened up for display. When being confronted with what seems like an indescribable moment of ecstasy, of course, James describes it beautifully. Like when he realizes he will be an artist. His soul had arisen from the grave of boyhood, spurning her grave clothes. Yes, yes, yes! Blow up. Yes, 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 he would create proudly out of the freedom and power of his soul, as the great artificer whose name he bore, Daedalus, a living thing, new and soaring and beautiful, impalpable, imperishable. In another one, this is right before he sees this young girl on the beach, and it triggers this moment inside of him, this awakening. Her image had passed into his soul forever, and no word had broken the holy silence of his ecstasy. Her eyes had called him, and his soul had leaped at the call, to live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to recreate life out of life. A wild angel had appeared to him, the angel of mortal youth and beauty, an envoy from the fair courts of life, to throw open before him in an instant of ecstasy the gates of all the ways of error and glory, on and on and on and on. He's also a master of setting the narrative tone through descriptions of the physical environment, using unusual juxtapositions of seemingly contradictory terms that work beautifully in communicating a subjective state of emotion. It unlocks these spaces in your mind. It's beautiful. For example, this is very simple, but the sunlight was queer and cold. Immediately shoots this feeling into my skull, but it's like, when would you ever use those words to describe sunlight, you know? It's interesting. Things that don't necessarily make sense, but do in a poetic context. He's very good at that. He also loves to describe Dublin, you know, the rain-soaked trees and the gray skies and the gray water. And I've been to Dublin and I've walked around there, and it's so much of it is similar to where I grew up in the Northwest in Portland, Oregon. And so it's like, you know, that's a terrain I'm familiar with. The kind of gloomy and dramatic and mysterious. You know, Dublin's a very mysterious city, very old too, much older than Portland, but yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful city. Definitely recommended for a trip. So referencing the Metamorphoses, portrait of the artist as a young man is the metamorphosis of Stephen Daedalus from a frightened, confused young man into a character strong enough to trust himself and face the unknown, face the immense risks and challenges of life. It's about not being afraid to face the threat of hell while acting in a manner you believe is true. As the title suggests, it's about a man trying to figure out what he's supposed to do with himself, what he believes, what he values, what he believes is true about art, about God, about beauty. In the end, he falls out of favor with the church. Does this mean that he and the book's author are vehement atheists? No. The character doesn't seem to possess any conviction on the existence of God, but rather that in its current iteration in the form of the church in Ireland, that it's absolutely the wrong path for him. Understandably so. Seems like this very domineering and tyrannical structure. And the book serves as a good critique of the dogmatic restriction of the church, especially at that time. Stephen's sensual nature, like Joyce's, would wither and die within its confines. He has far too much to lose. For anyone who has felt the same way, you'll probably recognize yourself in this story. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Classic. Better than food. If you have not subscribed already, would you please subscribe? Would you please hit that little button and come and join the family? Because we'd love to have you. If you're a writer and would like some feedback, you can hit me up on here, or Facebook, or Twitter, or Instagram. Any of those. All good. And now I will leave you with this line that I couldn't fit anywhere else in the review, but I thought was really cool. The past is consumed in the present, and the present is living only because it brings forth the future. Always remember, life is far too short to read bullshit. Stay strong, stay well read, stay good looking, eat your vegetables. Great to see you. Have a good night. Ciao.